Welcome to episode 8 of the fusedlogic podcast. I'm your host, Walter Schwabe. Today we dive into video journalism. I'm proud to speak with my good friend, Min Dhariwhal, who is a video journalist and sportscaster with CBC Edmonton. Min, welcome to the fusedlogic podcast.
Great to be here, Walter, and thanks for the invite.
Well, it's my pleasure, my friend. I mean, a little bit of background, of course. We grew up together, going to high school together, got into, all sorts of street hockey games and all sorts of fun and games as kids. And, it's interesting because I was just, I was reminiscing as I was thinking about our chat. And I was thinking, man, I don't know if I ever remember you saying to me at any point, I want to be a journalist. I'm going to go into journalism. That's where I'm going to focus my career. And of course, man, in high school, you and I and our friends, I mean, we were partying pretty hard and having fun, but I don't remember you saying that. When did you get inspired to take on the journalistic arts?
You know what? I know, in high school, it certainly wasn't on the radar. But at home, the newspaper and CBC really more than anything else was always on. So maybe subliminally, I don't know. I remember the Journal used to be at our house every day, every morning, and I used to like reading it from front to back. So I think the just being a curious kid was always there. And it wasn't something that I kind of flaunted and said, hey, did you read this story in the Journal or that story? But I remember reading stories and following guys like Cam Cole and Mark Spector and Jim Matheson as a kid and getting a kick out of their stories and reading them. And so the interest was always there. And, of course, CBC with Knowlton Nash. My parents, immigrated to Canada in the late 70s. And we lived in Montreal for a couple of years and then we moved out west. But that was something that, every night, 9 or 10 o'clock, it would always be on. So, if my parents were watching, you'd just kind of sit there and watch it as long as you could. And then, you'd be told to go to bed or whatever. But the older you got, you were able to watch it. So those are two things that were always constant throughout my youth and something that I, never really, they were there, but I maybe I didn't realize what kind of impact they had on me. And so after high school, when I was trying to figure out where this path was going, I was taking computers at NAIT, computer systems technology. One of my dad's brother, my uncle, was one of the instructors in the program. So, he was saying, hey, it might be something to think about. And it would have probably been a great field to be in the mid 90s and to hit all the tech booms that happened after that. But what I realized very quickly, it wasn't me. It just my personality, as you know, I'm a very outgoing person, and I love talking to people. So I just found that that was kind of being, it wasn't, I wasn't using that personality of mine, looking at flow charts and trying to figure out how to, decipher code and stuff like that. So I remember after the first semester or so, and there's, in my class, there were some great guys and gals that I got along with, but I just remember talking to my dad and saying, I don't know if this is for me. And the one thing I've been lucky with is my dad's a pretty understanding guy, and he said, well, find something that you think you have strength in, or is good for you. And so I remember looking at the program booklet, and I must have stumbled across it, and I saw radio, television, arts, and I thought, I wonder what that's all about. And I've always had a love for sports, so we're talking about the mid '90s here. So I looked at the program, and I think I might have gone and talked to the program head, and I liked what I heard, so I came back home. And I told my parents, I said, you know what, I think I found what I want to do. And so my dad's like, oh yeah, what is that? And I said, I want to be on TV. And my dad's like, okay, cool. Sign up and get in there. And my mom freaked out, and she thought what are you going to do? You're going to be a TV repairman? Is that what you want to be? You want to fix TVs? And I said to her, I'm like, no, that's not what I want to do. But I want to be on TV. I want to talk about sports, and I want to be a reporter. And that's where the journey started. And that was what, 1992, I think. So it was a long time ago.
Wow, that is such a great story. And I mean, I have to tell you that the personality wise, knowing you as I do, and like, in all due respect, we haven't hung out every day since high school. Of course, we actually haven't. We've been sort of going our own separate lives here, for years and years since high school. But having said that, when I think back to who you were as a pal in high school, your personality and the love of sports and everything you're doing today absolutely fits you to a T, man. Like, I could not see you sitting at a computer crunching numbers and coding, and not saying that you couldn't do it. You're not smart enough to do it or anything. I'm just saying I don't think that really fit the outgoing extrovert that you are. And I think that you really made a smart decision. There's no doubt about it in my mind, and I really enjoy it when I get a chance to watch your sportcasts or catch what you're doing online and where you're going and all that kind of stuff. And I got to tell you, look, I mean, you keep posting from the catwalk at Rogers Place. It drives me nuts, man. I mean, I would love to watch a game up there as a coach, a former minor hockey coach. I mean, I love watching the game develop, and you got such a great opportunity to watch some of the best players in the world. So, what a great decision, and it's obviously paid off. I mean, you started with A Channel, I think, back in 1997, I think it was, and so, tell me about, that first day you show up. You're a pro journalist, right? You're hired. It's your first day. You're going to be on camera, or you're going to have some sort of role. Tell me about that first day.
Well, there's a couple of first days, actually, and A Channel was my first gig in Edmonton. But before that, I worked in Red Deer and Saskatoon and Lethbridge. But there's two first days that hit me off the top of my head, and the first day really was back, I think, it was shortly after I'd gotten out of school. I'd done my practicum in Saskatoon. I'd moved back to Edmonton, and I had driven literally from Edmonton to Calgary to Lethbridge to Kamloops to Kelowna to Vancouver, and visited every TV station along the way with a trunk full of VHS demo tapes. And this was before the internet. The internet was just in its infancy, but that's how you did it back then, dude. You would look. There was a booklet that had who the reporters were at CTV in Calgary, who the news director was, who the general sales manager was. And so you could either phone them on the phone and say, hey, my name is Min or Walter, and I'm looking for a job. I'm just out of school. I did my practicum here. Just wondering what's available. Or you phoned and tried to set up an appointment, and you dropped in. And so I spent, I think it was a 2 or 3 week trip. And I drove all over Western Canada, and I didn't make it into Saskatchewan or Manitoba, but basically Alberta and BC. And I'll tell you what, that was an adventure. And there was some great meetings, and there was some not so great meetings. But eventually, after taking probably about 24 tapes or 30 tapes, I got a couple of calls back, and one of the calls was from a news director right here in Edmonton at CTV, which was CFRN at the time, and his name was Neil Fitzpatrick. And he has been a longtime journalist and longtime TV manager in Alberta and in Vancouver, who now teaches at the journalism program at Graham McEwen. And so he says, come on in, we have an opportunity, and I liked your tape, and let's talk. And so I went in, had an interview, and things went well. And at that time, and it may still be the case, CTV had satellite bureaus across the province. So, obviously CFRN was based in Edmonton, but in Grand Prairie, in Fort McMurray, in Red Deer, they had bureaus where they would have two video journalists based out of there, and they would whatever the stories were happening in those locations. That's what they would do, and they'd file the stories. And at that time, the stories would come in on the Greyhound. They would have to be shot on tape, cut on tape, and then fed in on Greyhound. There's no streaming it live or any of that stuff. But the first gig, or at least the first day on the job at CTV, I remember getting trained in Edmonton, and I went out on a shoot with a reporter at the time. His name was Garnet Lewis, and a longtime reporter in Edmonton, who now I think who ended up moving on to communications with the government, and a shooter named Robin Cleater, who just recently retired. I think he worked at CTV for over 30 years. And so the story was, it was really, I think it was in the summer, and it was very hot. There was a heat wave and stuff. And so he had to go, and his story that day was to talk to people who had cool jobs, who worked in cool, cold environments, when it was like plus 35 outside. And it was wild. Like this, Garnet Lewis at the time, he was grizzled. Like he was a old school vet reporter, did a lot of hard news and stuff like that. And Robin Cleater, longtime shooter, very experienced. So it was intimidating, to be in the van with these guys, kind of just seeing how it worked on a ride along. And I was just impressed at the way these guys would. It was as though they could just talk to anybody, they could just walk up and talk to whoever and just kind of engage them in a conversation and tell them what story they were working on, and then convince these people to go on camera, which isn't easy, right? I mean, people think, oh yeah, people just do an interview in front of the camera. I'll tell you what, like as someone who's behind the camera, whenever I see cameras at an event or anything like that, I don't go looking for them. I don't want to be on camera. But anyway, these guys, I still remember that day, and I thought to myself, wow, these guys are good at what they do. And so that was my first real introduction to, how it worked out on the beat, and how you gathered a story, how you brought it back, how you wrote it, what elements you used in your story, how the editing process worked, and then how you deliver it for the cast later on that evening. So that was day one. I think that was like 94 or 95. And then after that, I worked in Red Deer for a few years, then worked in Lethbridge for a couple of more. And then I came up to Edmonton when 6 months after A Channel launched. And my first day at A Channel, I will never forget, because doing live hits was just it was just coming in. I mean, live trucks and all that were, A Channel had gotten their own live truck. And I mean, coming from Lethbridge, we didn't have live trucks. So we never did live hits per se out in the field. And I remember at the assignment desk was a guy named Garnet Lewis. And he was now the assignment editor at A Channel. And he threw me right into the fire, assigned me some story. I can't remember, though, what the story was. But he said, here's the story you're doing. Here's your camera guy. Get out there and do it. And I remember coming back and writing it up and getting it ready. And then they wanted me to go do a live hit. Well, I'd never done a live hit on location, and it was at the Westin. And I remember just rushing over there. And it was all just, I don't even remember how I managed to get out 20 seconds to tee up my story. But I remember that live hit, and I remember the adrenaline just coursing through my veins, and I was scared. I was scared crapless. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And you just did it. You just did it, and you relied on your experience, and you pumped it out. And after it was done, it was the biggest relief. But for the longest time, when I worked at A Channel doing live hits, it was just nerve wracking for me, man. And I would try to memorize what I had to say, and people will tell you, you know what, you just have to know it. You have to know it. You can memorize it until you're blue in the face, but there's no guarantee it's going to come out how you envision, right? So those are 2 days that totally stick out, and 25 years later, I still remember.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering now, do you still, when you have an opportunity to either do a live hit or, you're pulling a story together, regardless of what it's about, do you still get a little bit of that adrenaline shot? Do you still get excited about it? Is it still giving you that?
Yeah. You do every time. I think once that feeling goes, then it's time to look elsewhere. But it's just the way it's set up, and it depends on the story, right? Just how much the dynamic of the story, or whether it's a sporting event, that you have to, portray that energy. You have to, tell people what's happening and describe what's happening. And it's hard not to get hyped up for it. I mean, you have a director talking in your ear, telling you, "Okay, we're coming to you in 30. Get ready." And so once you hear that 10 countdown, you know that you're going to be on there, and it's to a certain extent, you're performing, right? So, and you have to sell the story. You have to, show people that you're into what you're doing. Otherwise, they're not going to be engaged. And when I say sell the story, not try to convince them of what is going on, you're presenting them the story, presenting them the facts, and you have to engage them. And if you're not engaged, the viewer certainly won't be. So, you still get that buzz. And now it's different now with the formats and with live streaming and how everything's happening. And a good example of that is, Facebook Live. I'm sure a lot of your listeners and yourself and people have watched it, have partaken in it. And, we were at the Heritage Classic a couple of weeks back in October, and we did a Facebook Live for 35 minutes. I would never even, a couple of years back, be able to even imagine to be talking for 30 or 35 minutes straight. But you know what? It's just the way it is now, and you just walk and talk. You just kind of roll with it.
I was just going to jump in there. It's interesting because, back in 2009, we did a project where we were live streaming. We had figured out the technology where we could stream live, it was interesting because there were instances where our crew would show up to a press conference and we would stream live from the press conference. And I remember, Ted Bauer, I think, at Global Television, the assignment desk, right? Ted was like calling us the competition because we'd show up and we'd stream the press conference live or whatever it was live, and it'd be out there unedited, and everybody was pulling in their packages, right? And they were trying to get it ready for the evening. And by that time, we had already put it out there. And I'm only saying that because, Facebook obviously wasn't streaming live back then at that time. But this has really opened up a whole other level of citizen journalism, if you will, if you can use that term loosely, right? And so I wanted to ask you it's a great segue. How has social media, and I mean, you just touched on it a little bit there, but how has social media impacted your job as a professional paid journalist? How do you address that in your job every day?
Well, it's had a huge impact, right? I mean, live trucks don't exist anymore. Everybody carries around a thing called a Digero, which is basically the ability to live stream any event around the world or to any source. You know what I mean? Like if there's an event happening at Rogers Place, we can shoot it. It goes through the Digero, which works on cell phone technology, and we could feed it to Toronto, or we could feed it live onto Facebook or stream it live onto any online platform. So, you guys were ahead of the curve in '09 because we weren't certainly doing that in '09. At least I don't think. But social platforms like Twitter or Instagram, more so Twitter than anything, has changed our job because the appetite to know what's going on at the corner of 137th Ave and 97th Street right now, as opposed to waiting for it 6 hours later, has changed the way newsrooms work, because we have to put that material out right away. Whereas Joe, average Joe on the street, he may be there at the same time as we are. And you tweet out a picture saying, okay, something's going on at this scene, or what have you, and then they can just kind of keep moving on. Whereas as a journalist, we still have to get in there, find out what the story is, find out the details, get some interviews, write it up, present it online, because that's how it works now. You get it out online first, and then it goes to radio, and then TV gets it last. Or if it's a live event, it'll get it right away as well. As an example, like say Newsnet Live or whatever, which is running throughout the day. But that's what's happened now, right? I mean, everybody has a voice. You have a voice. Anybody on the street with a phone or with a device has a voice, and they can say this is what's going on. So when an incident does happen, and if you ever search it on Twitter, you'll see everybody who is there, or who may have gotten a shot, or who may have captured some video. Will have the ability to put it online right away.
So when you You look
Yeah.
at that new environment now as part of a challenge for you to get the right information out as soon as you possibly can, because you now, as you just said, you're not only competing against your typical mainstream media competitors, as you always
Right.
have, for the
Yeah.
airtime and the audience, but now you're also competing against the private citizen with a phone and
Right.
device. So, but you still have to have that journalistic integrity to go through your process and to
100%.
basically speed the process up, use
Yeah.
technology more effectively maybe than in the past. And so
Yeah.
let me ask you this, do you think that applies so much pressure that sometimes maybe things get missed or sometimes mistakes are made? I mean, we're all human, we're going to make mistakes, but do you think
Yeah.
that actually creates a situation where maybe, the news is not as thorough as back in the day with Walter Cronkite?
Yeah. No, I still think the news, the vetting process is thorough. Like, I mean, I may go cover a story and I come back and I write it up. Sure, there's a rush to get it out, but you're not going to let the rush to get it out cloud your judgment. You still have to, show both sides of the story and get it vetted and put it out. And I mean, when I say people are now have the ability to tweet something or to get a shot, they're there for a brief, however time it is. They've parachuted in, they've parachuted out. But I mean, we're there longer than they are, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're digging
And
deeper into the story.
yeah, you're totally digging deeper. And I mean, that's a small percentage, I would say, of stories that get tweeted out that you're covering with other people. For instance, if it's a court story, you know, the average person off the street's not going to be sitting in that courtroom for 5 days and listening to testimony and, writing down quotes and then presenting a story later on that afternoon or later on that evening. So, I mean, those kind of stories still require a journalist to be in there to present the facts and to listen to what's being done. I think that won't change. But,
And that's good because that's what we need.
it is good. It is good. We need that. You need that. And, but, other events like, more so live kind of breaking news where you have the ability to be on the sidelines watching, as a non-journalist. I mean, that happens more and more now. I mean, just look at your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed or what have you. It's nonstop, right?
Yeah.
It's nonstop.
It's constant.
And, yeah. And I think, it's prolific, really. I mean, at a certain point, you have to turn the switch off.
Yeah, you do. You have to unplug. I do. I unplug every year. But let me ask you, what has been the most amazing or impactful interview you've ever done in your career?
Wow, those are a lot of interviews.
Does one stick out?
Yeah, there is. You know what? Recently, there was one that stuck out. I mean, being in this business, you get to meet a lot of, you get to rub shoulders and be beside a lot of people who are, who have been impactful beyond explanation. Like, I mean, whether it be sports figures or politicians or heads of state and things like that, or even people with amazing stories, who are sharing that story with you and how they felt when it happened. So, I've been in a lot of situations where it's emotional, or someone has lost a loved one, or what have you. But covering sports and growing up in Edmonton, obviously, the Oilers of the '80s were, it shaped our lives, I think.
Absolutely.
To a great extent. And over the years, I've had the great pleasure of being in places where guys like Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier have been, and their circle is very small, right? So whenever Gretzky parachutes into town, he'll shake Jim Matheson's hand and Terry Jones's hand, or Brian Hall's hand. These are guys that he, as a youngster, as a 17, 18-year-old, he kind of grew up. And being interviewed by. So it's always amazing to hear to see him and to hear him speak about whatever it is he's there for. And a couple of months back, I guess in the summer it would have been, after Gordie Howe passed away, obviously I wanted to get some reaction to Gordie Howe passing away. This is, a legend in the game, a man who played for so many years and did so much for the game. And so I phoned a contact of mine in town, and I said, I need someone locally. Like, do you know of anybody? And he said to me, he goes, what about Wayne Gretzky? And I said, yeah, well, what about Wayne Gretzky? He'd be great to get. And he goes, well, do you have a pen handy? And I said, yeah, I've got a pen handy. And he goes, okay, take this email down, email him, tell him who you are and what you're looking for and where he can get a hold of you. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, I'll just do that. And he'll give me a call, like, as if, right? The guy is probably so busy. And he goes, no, seriously, do it. And so I said, okay. And I didn't really think much of it, because having been in this business this many years, I know it's not easy to get a guy like Wayne Gretzky. And so I fired the email off, and I'm sitting there working on the story, trying to get some other interviews lined up. And about 45 minutes to an hour later, my cell phone rings, and it says Thousand Oaks, California. And I'm like, okay, Thousand Oaks, California. I'm pretty sure that's where Wayne Gretzky lives. I know he's in California, so who else would be phoning me from California? And I answer the phone. I'm like, hello. And on the other line, someone's voice goes, hi, can I speak to Min? And I go, it's Min. And he goes, hi, Min, it's Wayne. And like, it just kind of, like my throat, it's almost as though the muscles in my throat just seized up. And I was kind of flabbergasted. And from there on, we spoke for about 12 minutes. Like, he did an interview with me on the phone for 12 minutes. And it was just amazing to talk to this guy about his idol, a guy that he grew up knowing from the time he was, I think, it must have been 7 or 8, and a guy that helped shape his life. And this is the morning of when it happened. And here he is giving me 10, 15 minutes on the phone, talking about it and sharing his personal stories. And he was amazing. Like, it was amazing to talk to him about Gordie Howe and the impact that Howe had on his own life, the game, his professional career, his life after hockey, helped shape him be the person he is, almost like fatherly status, And it was like I had the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up after that. And I tell people that story to this day. And this is something that happened after I was in the business over 20 years. And, it was incredible. And I had a chance to see Wayne after that at another event. And normally I would never have done this, but after the event was done, I think it was when he was here to open the restaurant at the EIA at the airport. And I just went up to him. I said, Wayne, my name's Min. I work at CBC. And he's like, yeah, I remember. Yeah. And I go, I just want to thank you for returning that call and talking to me about Gordie Howe back in the summer. I said, that was amazing. And he said, hey, anytime you need anything, you got my email, give me a shout. And I was just like, you don't have too many moments. You try to kind of stay impartial and all that stuff. But I was just like, wow, this guy is solid. Like, he's just great. He's just a great person, despite all the fame and everything that's come with him playing the game and all the records and stuff like that. The guy is the realest guy. He was so real and he was so accommodating. And, you can't say that about everybody in this business.
No.
So that would, I would say that would probably be it. More so than interviewing people face to face and, talking to them on camera and stuff like that. Like, he allowed himself to be real with me. And, that doesn't happen all the time.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that story, and it is amazing. And throughout the history of the Oilers, whenever you heard Wayne Gretzky's name mentioned.
Yeah.
He was always mentioned with reverence for being just a really solid human being, always. There was
Yeah.
never any
Yeah.
comment about him being, terrible in the dressing room or this or that.
Right.
He was always a
Right.
solid guy. And
Yeah.
he always, repeatedly, I think, communicated how much Gordie Howe meant to him. And the fact that you got to cover that story between the two of them in a sad
Yeah.
moment and a heartfelt moment. But, I think that is such an amazing opportunity. I mean, Gordie Howe, obviously, like you said, changed the game in so many ways. His longevity, his intensity. I mean, you never wanted to be up against this guy in a corner for sure. And
No,
there was just so many things.
But he was great off the ice. Yeah,
but he was a gentleman off the ice,
right?
absolutely.
Gentleman. And for him, the importance was, you know what, you can be great on the ice, but if you're not making the people around you great and making the people around you feel great, then it's being wasted.
Yeah.
And so, and you could tell from talking to Wayne that that's the message he learned from Gordie really young, and that's the way he lived his life after that as a pro. And now you see it a little bit with him and Connor McDavid.
I was just going to ask.
I sense McDavid is the same kind of person, and he's getting the same kind of advice from Wayne, because Wayne, like Gordie did, taking Wayne under his wing. I see Wayne taking Connor under his wing. It's not public. It's not in front of the lights or anything like that. But if you look at in the time that Connor's been here and the interaction he's had with all the old Oilers and stuff like that, there's something there between him and Wayne, and it's great to see.
You know what? If that was the one thing that Wayne did as part of the organization loosely, then that's job well done. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Connor McDavid seems to have that same sort of calm demeanor, relaxed, balanced, focused, and that's the way it looks like on the ice. In fact, my wife Erica, just the other day, we were watching the game, and she said, no matter what happens, the goal gets disallowed and whatever, and there's like a fraction of a second left, and he's just like, well, okay, we'll just keep going, and that was his reaction to it. Reminds me of Grant Fuhr a lot, man. That guy, it just nothing fazed Grant Fuhr, no matter what happened to him, and it was always just the same. Well, we're just gonna have to, do better, and that's the way it goes, right? And so
I think some guys are just wired that way, right? Some guys are just wired that way. There's others that would lose it, and you see that, but. Grant for sure is a calm person. I've never seen that guy. I've seen the same way he is, or was as an athlete, the same way he is as a regular guy now. But you never see that guy waver at all.
Your ability to go to Rogers, which is really such a fantastic facility, and there are I don't know, there are some downsides to it, I guess. As a fan, I go there, and I mean, for the first time ever. And this is, I've had to wait in line to use the men's washroom at Rogers, and I'm not the only one who's commented on this. I know you guys got your own sort of, but I mean,
spot upstairs.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, wow, man, really? But I guess, women will say, who are listening to this right now, they go, it's about time, because, women always wait, right? So, but I find it amazing. It's almost like you can't in between periods, you can't waste too much time. You got to get in line right away, right?
I've had the chance to go as a fan a few times, and the washrooms are a little lackluster, should I say?
I don't know what the system is, man.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're building a place like that, you think that there's so much to it, right? There's so much to it, and you think that maybe this looks adequate, but until the people are in there, you're just not going to know.
So I got I've had so much fun listening to these stories, man, and I really appreciate your time. I got one more question for you.
Yeah.
When you at some point down the road you intend to sort of retire and spend even more time with your family and your kids,
right?
What do you hope will be your legacy as a video journalist, as a sportscaster? What do you hope you can look back on and say, here's what I was able to do? When I was that young guy in Nate making that career decision, you weren't sure how it was going to pan out, and then you look back on your career. What do you hope to be able to say you left?
Well, retirement is still way down there, so there's a lot of time between now and then. But definitely, I think you know what, I want to be remembered as a guy who, through my work, hopefully, was able to tell some of the great, I think, stories about some of the great people in Edmonton. You know, I've always been a fan of a champion of Edmonton, and I love this city. And, you know, I've traveled all over the world and seen some amazing places, been to some amazing places. I have a lot of family in the UK. But you know what, I always end up coming back here. And we always say, you know, oh, it'd be great to live here or it'd be great to live there. But you know what, Edmonton is a great place. It's a great place to raise your family. Like I said, through my work, I've been able to meet so many great people who live here, who may not necessarily be from Edmonton, but many of them are. But I just think that you know, those stories will always be there and will always need a place to be told. And as long as I can still do that, you know, I'll keep on plugging away and take a lot of pride in doing that, right? And bringing those stories to the rest of Edmonton and you know, the rest of Canada, the world, really, now with online stories. I mean, it can be read by anybody. So I think it's important, and that part of journalism will always be important. And hopefully people will still find it necessary to have you know, a place to be able to read those stories. So you know, that's what I think. That's where I think I would leave it at.
Min Dhariwhal, my good friend and CBC video journalist and sportscaster, thank you so much for being on the fusedlogic podcast today and sharing your stories and your experience going through this, really what I consider to be a tough career. You know, It's not easy. So thank you so much for coming on the fusedlogic podcast and sharing your stories with us today.
Hey, Walter, anytime. My pleasure, brother. You're my dear friend from back in the day, and you know, you have a lot of stories you could share about me that you won't, which I really appreciate. But it's been fun. I love doing this kind of stuff, and anytime you need me, you know where I am.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
That was Min Dhariwhal, video journalist and sportscaster with CBC Edmonton. You know, what a great guy. And man, the stories that he was sharing there are just amazing to me. You know, just such depth. And I know there's a guy with such a strong career. And, you know, he shows up to work every day. He works hard like many people do, many journalists do. But, you know, he just has such this amazing humbleness about him. And I really appreciate his time coming on the show. You know, one of the things that I learned from that interview with Min is that, you know, you have to be afraid. First of all, you got to stay true to who you are. And back in the days in Nate, you know, that's what he was doing. He was staying true to who he is. And look at the results of making that decision back then. What a great lesson for everybody to learn there. And then, of course, you know what? Power through it. Even though you're full of anxiety and stress and you're not sure how you're going to do it, trust in your training, power through it, persevere, and do it anyways. And then, you know what? If he doesn't do that on his first day on the job, he doesn't get to a point where he gets to interview a guy like Wayne Gretzky talking about another great guy like Gordie Howe. So, I mean, wow, just so many great life lessons there. You know, check Min out. He is, of course, all over social media. So, you know, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, he's there. And of course, that's why he's there. So check out @Minners_D for Instagram. He's got some great pictures of his job daily. You know, I forgot to ask him what book he was reading because, you know, that would have been a great question, but I just couldn't interrupt him. I had to let him flow with what he was doing because there were such great stories there. You know, I want to thank you, our audience, for your support. You know, this is episode 8. We're cruising up on episode 2. We've got some great guests coming up, absolutely fabulous guests coming up from all sorts of walks of life. And I really hope you're enjoying this podcast and the information we're bringing to you and the value involved. And I really do appreciate your feedback and your commitment to listening to the show on the commute in. I know that some of my colleagues, you know, Ken and Dallas and others have given me great feedback about the fact that they're listening to the show as they drive into work every morning, and I really do appreciate your time, folks. You know, I want to remind you just to head to Octavo Productions website because you got to check out some of the work that Thomas Brabeck and his team Jocelyn and others do in terms of voiceover, fresh music, and the mixing they do for cool bands around the world, man. This is a talented crew. So check them out. And thank you for heading to fusedlogic.com and listening to our podcast, reading our blog posts, and asking us about our services. And if you do have a moment, as always, I'd like to remind you to head to newbeginningsmexico.org and make a donation. I have to give kudos to my wife, Erica. She has been working so hard, and just in the last couple of days has raised enough money by selling some of the products that these women make, has raised enough money to feed 3 families for over a week in one day. And, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to feed these families for a short period of time. Way to go, Erica. Keep it up. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do enjoy putting this podcast together. I hope you can see value in it. And I just want to remind you, as your host, Walter Schwabe, that you were made to thrive.
Fused Logic. Analytics and engagement evolved.